and welcome to the latest episode of our One World Many Beliefs with the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. My name is Christian Taylor. I see some returning guests who have been with us before. I'm a board member of the Interfaith Council, and just to give a good summary of what this is about, this is really about us learning and having dialogue around the different faiths and worldviews that exist out there, and so that we can kind of get a good, maybe at least a summary understanding of what those faith and those beliefs are about. That's what the Interfaith Council really helps to try to create, is opportunities for us to come together from different backgrounds. There might be irreconcilable differences, but that's actually what we can appreciate about the different thoughts, philosophies, and faiths in our Central Florida area. So today we have Dr. Ernie Bursey, who is going to talk to us about Seventh-day Adventism. And we're going to learn from him. He is currently a professor of religion in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences since 2001, and he is professor at Advent Health University. He received the Educator of the Year Award in 2009, and he earned his graduate degrees, including his Master's in Divinity degree from Andrews University, a Master's of Arts in Religious Studies from Yale University, and a PhD in New Testament Studies from Yale University, with his dissertation topic on exorcism in the book of Matthew. He's a member of the Society of Biblical Literature and Adventist Society for Religious Studies, and serving as president in 2000. I don't know if this is currently still true, but he's in the midst of a project funded by Advent Health University Presidential Grant to produce 2 series of videos: World Religions Meet American Pluralism and World Religions Meet American Healthcare. Well, Dr. Bursey, is Ernie, as he likes to be called, it's good to have you, and we'll give you the time.
Thank you. What a wonderful building. I just saw this, wow. I don't think it was cheap, was it? You all have a copy of what I'm going to cover, it outlined, but you can just, I'm going to try to expand on what I have a little bit. I'll step over this way, I think. Yeah. So, a little bit about myself. You heard that I was ordained as a minister, a youngster. I worked as a pastor for about 7 years, and then I've been a teacher for about 52 years. So you can add it up. Okay. In other words, I'm an antique. My father and mother were Seventh-day Adventists. My mother was a convert from Lutheranism, the Lutheran faith, back in New England. And my dad had a saying. He said, you pick up saying, he says, "I'm a member of the loyal opposition." And I kind of like that. That sort of describes how I relate as a member of the community of faith that I'm part of. I had the privilege when I came here in 2001 to do something I had never envisioned that I would be able to do. I was asked to teach courses I hadn't prepared for or ever taught. Courses like World Religions for Healthcare Professionals. I had never taught that course. And issues of grief and loss, and a whole bunch of other courses that were different than the standard religion courses I did with the 28 years at Walla Walla, which is now Walla Walla University. So I've been kind of in a high-speed educational process. And part of my challenge here is that I haven't been teaching Adventist beliefs for, good grief, over 25 years now. I've been teaching things much more broadly than that. So this was a good experience for me to kind of put pieces together. So I'm going to start with an assignment for each of you. I want you to think, and I've got a pen here. You can't take the teacher out of the teacher. If you were to finish a sentence that starts with the word Seventh-day Adventist, how might you finish it? And I'll give each of you a moment to think. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to keep track to get a picture whatever stands out in your mind. So I kind of know what territory. Yes.
Are sometimes vegetarians.
Sometimes vegetarians. Okay, very good, Jeremy. That's accurate. That's accurate. Anybody else?
What is it?
What is it? Okay. Okay, that's fair enough.
Don't know anything about it.
Don't know anything about these people, okay. Don't know anything about it, my goodness. Yes,
Go to church on Saturday.
go to church on Saturday, okay?
Look forward to the second coming of Christ.
Okay, so you got the Seventh Day Adventist there. Dan, any things that come to mind when you?
Oh yeah, I attended a service once for young people where they preached less and demonstrated more.
Okay.
That sticks in my mind.
So Seventh-day Adventists preach less and demonstrate more, okay? So what questions do you have? Just to get an idea, because I make sure I cover what you want to know or what you don't know that you would like to know. You're giving me a blank check, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the look on your face.
Oh, I'd be curious in the origins,
Origins.
time and place,
Origins.
and reasons.
Pardon?
Time and place and reasons
Origins.
for coming into being.
Sure, that's very good. That's important. Anything else? Okay, you remind me of my occupational therapy class. They all are thinking but not talking.
Be interested too, maybe in some of the local history, because it seems that there's a significant presence in Central Florida.
My goodness, isn't that true? The local. And you see I'm wearing my badge like I should wear. I mean, I don't wear it, I try to get away without wearing it. But it says something, it's got the badge that lets me in a building, in an office, so I can run things off like this morning, even though I'm on emeritus. So we'll talk a little bit about local too. So, let's see, I'm pointing this way, there we go. I want to give you two stories first, to give you kind of a background that might be interesting to think about. The story on the left, a group of young people were going to the Holy Land, to Palestine, to Israel. They were Adventist kids, Seventh-day Adventist kids. And there is a movement within Judaism to try to reclaim the younger generation for a more traditional worship of Judaism. Some of the more conservative ones, we call them Haredi, very conservative beliefs and convictions. And if you pay any attention to the issues between the ultra-conservatives and others in Judaism, particularly in Palestine or in Israel, depending on how you want to say it, their tension is there, even as it relates to requirement for military service. But anyway, so this gentleman came up to this young lady and said, and looking as she was a prospective person to be pulled in with maybe her liberal Jewish parents to get her to be a little more conservative. And he said to her, "Are you Jewish?" And she proudly said, "No, but we Adventists keep the Sabbath too." And he said, "Don't you do that, that's ours." Okay, so that story, look at that one. All right, and then she was surprised. She thought he'd be happy that he wasn't. The second one is a much more difficult story. I had a speaking appointment at a university, and the president and his wife were taking me back to the airport. And on the way, she got a phone call and asked if we could stop by a certain house where the lady in the house was alone and had just discovered that her husband had died. This lady was maybe a year or two younger than me, and her husband too. But they were both active, vibrant people, and it was a tremendous shock. It came without any warning whatsoever. So I being the oldest one, and the college president and his wife being younger, then they kind of deferred to me to have to handle the issues that came. And I knew this young lady when she was younger, hadn't seen her for many years, and walked in the door, and she was a tall, attractive 80-year-old woman. Just emotionally driven. I mean, it was just a shock beyond belief to her. And we went in and sat down, and she said to me, "Where is my husband? Where is my husband?" Well, I knew she was a Seventh-day Adventist, and I know she was in grief. So what would an Adventist say to a question like that? Where is my husband? And, you know, I'm grateful for ideas that come to me. Being a religious person, I don't think I generate them all. I said, your husband is in God's heart.
Oh, that's nice.
Because Seventh-day Adventists don't believe that a soul, a disembodied soul, floats through somewhere and has to wait until the second coming, until it hits a body. We'll talk more about that. But that story caught two significant beliefs of Seventh-day Adventists. The first one, Sabbath, which they thought the Jewish gentlemen would be delighted that they were, and the other one, my own personal experience, and that was something. Yeah. So, words about words and letters. It's the Seventh-day Adventist Church, not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now,
But it used to be called that.
no. Just don't confuse Seventh-day Adventists with Mormons.
Two different things.
No. And you see, you got this dash and day here, Seventh Day, Latter Day. It's very easy to get confused. Kind of put that up there for you. The other thing is, we're part of a country that kind of take over. There's North America, there's South America, there's Central America. But we know when someone says America, they really mean our country, right? So we've taken over the word America, which really belongs to a lot of countries. They're all part of America, but we say we're Americans, and we've taken the name and made it our own. Well, that's comparable what's happened with the word Adventist. Every Christian community is Adventist if it looks for the return of Jesus. That's what it's referring to. So how did one small group get to take the whole word and own it? But that's kind of what's happened. When someone says, I'm an Adventist, well, they don't mean that you're a Christian. They mean that you're a part of a denomination within Christianity. So it's kind of like a takeover, and at least be aware that I'm not quite sure that that's good. Can
Sure, come on.
You're right on time. Come on in and sit down. Thank you. So then how do you say the word Adventist? If you hear it, someone from the United States who grew up as an Adventist says Adventist. Other people say Adventists, and it's a giveaway right away. That they're from a different culture, or they don't know how to say the word right. So Adventist is the way I was raised to say it, but you'll hear people say Adventists. I don't know.
Yeah.
Adventist, yeah. See how do I do this right here? SDA, that's another abbreviation, and not LDS. Again, see how the confusion comes in, Latter-day Saint. By the way, we don't use the word Mormons anymore, right? You refer to them as Latter-day Saints or Saints. And hear a little bit about the organization. Then there's the NAD, the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. That's the governing body in the United States. Then there's the General Conference, which has about 9 or 10 different divisions. And then there's this GC, Great Controversy, which is a book, which some of you may have had dropped on your door, I don't know. And then thinking about organization, you have a local church, you have the Florida Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, you have the Southern Union of Seventh-day Adventists, which is here in the United States, the North American Division, probably, in my judgment, again, as a member of the loyal opposition, too many layers. Too many layers. Duplications unnecessary, but that's my perspective. Something about numbers, just to give you an idea, 23 million Seventh-day Adventists, and they're quite pleased. We're quite pleased to say that in 235 recognized countries, there's Adventist present in 212. The languages, they publish in 535 different languages. Now, the striking thing is the next two lines. Seventh-day Adventist Church started up in New England, New York, with an American production. What percentage of Adventists live in North America? Less than 6%. That's one of the most striking features right there. That would differentiate from the Mormons church, the Latter-day Saints church, where they have a much larger presence in the United States. Let's take Africa for an example. 45% of Adventists live in various African countries. Significant presence there, significant role. This would also be true, a significant presence in the Caribbean area. So while it started within the United States, the numbers are radically moved elsewhere. And the people living in the United States are kind of getting used to that, thinking, you know, we thought it was ours, and no, the power shifted elsewhere. And even in the United States, significant ethnic increases. If I go to my church and I look at what's the equivalent of the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Pathfinders, overwhelmingly they don't look like me. They're black, they're brown, and they are enthusiastic and doing great things. So even in North America, the so-called European percentage of population among Adventists has dropped significantly. So it's a phenomenon. It's kind of intriguing to think that 19 out of 20 Seventh-day Adventists live outside of North America. Another interesting statistic, worldwide, this community operates 229 church hospitals. That's a pretty good sized number for a group of 20 million people. You can look at the numbers there. They have 10 medical schools, only one in North America. They have 2 in Africa, they have them in Asia, Philippines, in Peru, and so forth. So it's dispersed. It was a missionary movement that started about the 1870s, and it's been remarkably successful. So let's talk about local here, healthcare. Five systems in North America. The Seventh-day Adventist denomination operates the largest Protestant system of hospitals in the world. And that's just, that calls for some kind of explanation. How did that happen? Certainly, the majority of people who work there are not Adventists, but leadership and so forth, it's that perspective. So here we have Advent Health, which has 52 hospitals in 7 states, including 7 right here in Central Florida, as you know. And you notice the word Advent Health is shoved together, there's no space between them. Sometimes, if you don't know it, people try to do something. No, they're supposed to be right tight like that. And then there's Adventist Health, where they opened it up and put the word there. That's another system in California, and Oregon, and Washington. And you notice that I put the mission, which, interestingly enough, as you look at it, it doesn't sound at all sectarian. Christian, but it's not sectarian. Extending the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, you heard that I did a dissertation on exorcism. Jesus, if he was anything, was an exorcist. I have to tell you that. But we don't have a department of exorcism in any of the hospitals. We talk about that in my classes. And then you have a smaller one here, Adventist Health Care. Notice Advent Health, Adventist Health Care, That's in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. And then 2 more smaller ones, one Kettering up around in Ohio. Maybe you've heard of Kettering. And again, notice all of these mission statements with the exception of Kettering, they have theirs in their vision, have a distinctly faith-based language. Loma Linda University Health operates 6 hospitals and a medical school out there. You may have heard of Loma Linda University Medical School, Loma Linda doctors. Here in Florida, I teach with my students, the graduate students, we think about creation health, which is whole person care. And creation stands for choice, rest, environment, activity, trust, interpersonal relationships, outlook, and nutrition. That's what it takes. So I have students who are in the graduate program right now who are working on implementing some of these positive long-term habits in their life in place of some of the ones that they picked up by living in this country. I'm sorry I failed to put the number of grade schools and middle schools, but this gives you an idea. I got that far. Colleges and universities, 118 colleges operated by church with 22 million. That's pretty high percentage, pretty high percentage. Some of them are struggling for a variety of reasons. For example, in North America, we have 14, and I would say over half of them are struggling with enrollment, and we think about why that is. In Africa alone, 30 universities and hospitals in Africa, hospitals and colleges, and that number will probably go up. Have you heard of ADRA? Ever heard of ADRA? ADRA is an interesting phenomenon. It works with people in poverty and distress, and it partners with governments, communities, and organizations. And it runs out of the Adventist Church, but it's independent. It is a no strings attached. They do not proselytize as part of their outreach. And that's troublesome people who think they should, but they have a tremendous reputation. I think of some of the stories there in Sarajevo, where the ADRA was the only organization that could handle the mail. But in many parts of the world, they work as a broker, given monies to see that it's used right from other organizations. Sometimes young people find that an exciting place to work. So if we think about Adventists on the religion map, so where do they fit in? They have the 28 fundamentals. They used to have 27, but with a large number of converts coming from Africa, where there was a strong emphasis on ancestor worship and those kinds of things, they wrote one that had to do with relationship with God and so forth. In general, their agreement with the Apostles' Creed, although they want a small c for Catholic, not a big C, the universal Christian Church, and their definition of hell is definitely different than that of many Christians. In other words, basically, some of the words he translated in the King James Protestant Bible as hell really are the grave. And so Adventists don't believe in an eternal burning hell that's on fire right now. Protestants, they believe in salvation by grace through Christ apart from works, but I think that's a fair statement to say they struggle with legalism and with an idea that if you don't keep the Sabbath, you won't go to where you want to go. Now, that kind of an attitude that's been very much part of emphasizing the distinctives, and we'll think more about that. But clearly, since probably the 1880s on, Adventists began to think we've got to look at the foundation of relationship with God, and think about it in terms of what God does for us, and not just what we think we do for God. Conservative lifestyles, they came largely, but not entirely, out of 19th century Methodists, disciples. There were several different Protestant denominations, but the Methodists probably might be one of the most prominent. So 19th century Methodists were conservative, pretty much, and Adventists had that also lifestyle. High view of biblical authority, the literal return of Jesus, and the historicity of Genesis 1 to 11. That seems to be a battle point right now within the Adventist Church. In other words, the flood, universal, and so forth. They're Arminians and not Calvinists. Does that ring any bells to any of you? Calvinists believe that God decided in advance who was going to be saved, and Jesus died to save just those people, and there's nothing they can do about it either way. They will be. And Arminians thought, if there's anything that's important, it's the freedom of choice that God gives us. And so there's it's a battle over, and Adventists are clearly in the Arminian camp. In other words, Presbyterians would be more Calvinist, and some Baptists also, but typically those people who would call themselves Arminian would be many, many Protestants, probably most evangelicals. A limited dualism. It's always interesting to figure out who's in charge. If there's someone in charge, who is it? And Adventists will say, well, God is in charge, but for ethical reasons in terms of in terms of the misunderstanding of what God is like, Satan has made a counterclaim. And he has, and one might put it this way, it's a choice between what we would call unselfish versus selfish perspectives. Adventists are big on Daniel and Revelation. They started out, in the 19th century, 1800s, with a lot of attention to the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. And even today, on Sundays, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can join a group of Adventist scholars who do really high-level work, and it's all on apocalyptic, it's run by a group of laymen, but all the professionals come in and they talk. It's a safe place. They can bring up. So it's still a very prominent part. When a group of people came over to accredit our university, and they came to my office, this was to get accredited within the Adventist system of education. They wanted to know where was our course on Daniel and Revelation. And I had to explain to them, this is a different kind of school. We don't have a course on Daniel and Revelation. But it's very much part of the thinking, the apocalyptic, which is this world going to continue? Is there anything in terms of a Christian perspective? Is there such a thing as a return of Jesus? He said he was leaving according to the documents that would come down. What would that be like? How would we know what would happen? And the book of Revelation is quite a book which deals with those kinds of questions in great detail. And Adventists have a particular take on those. So, Jeremy, back in the 1830s, 20s and 30s, a farmer named William Miller started studying his Bible. And he was looking at some prophecies. By the way, Adventists are just part of a long, long discussion about how you read and understand biblical prophecy. Unto 2,300 days, and then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. That's where's the sanctuary? Well, he concluded the sanctuary was the earth. He did Bible studies. And over a period of time, to simplify, he thought Christ would return to purify the earth, like 1 Peter talks about. And so that 1843 got moved to 1844. October 22, 1844 is the day of either infamy or revelation, depending on how you look at it. So he expected that to happen, and he was a very devout person. He was a sober farmer who had the ability to be very convicting and sincere. And there were quite a few of these Millerites. They called them Millerites at first. And you may have read some stories about some of them. Some of them actually sold everything they had, and when Christ didn't return, then they had nothing for the winter, and they had to borrow from their scornful neighbors. But, many people just walked away. It's okay. And Miller said, he's coming. I don't know when, but he's coming, and I'm going to hold on to that. A group of them, Seventh-day Adventists, came out of a smaller group, which said, the sanctuary that's being talked about, it can't be the one on earth. Well, first of all, this 2,300 days, if you understand it in terms of days equal a year, it's part of the understanding of the logic, that it moves you from a certain date in the 5th century BC up to 1844. So the Adventists said, well, maybe it's not the earth, but it's the heavenly sanctuary. There's no sanctuary here on earth. The temple's been broken. So they began to think about that, and they looked at the Day of Atonement in the Old Testament, and they did some work with it. And you can, I don't want to get into the details now because I'm looking at my enemy up there. But anyway, they came up with the understanding that at this time, something had happened in heaven, not on earth. God was readying to do the final phase before Christ came. There was what they called the so-called investigative judgment. Somebody has to look at the books ahead of time, figure it out, and then when Christ comes, it's all settled. So they began to believe that Jesus was coming very, very soon, and they put everything into it. I mean, they really did. But no date. And that's probably the case today, although the sense of imminence may not be as strong in some quarters. I would not underestimate that, though. So then What happened too is the development of the great controversy theme, the battle between good and evil, between God and Satan. Jesus talks about, you know, the ruler of this world, and Jesus says in so many words, he just talks about the kingdom of Satan in his own talking. And then they began to pay attention to the importance of the commandment that was being neglected, the one that was overlooked. That's quite clear. Exodus 20. I grew up reciting this. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor, do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. And Adventists take that quite seriously. That is to say, they don't believe it changed. They don't believe it changed. And furthermore, many Adventists feel that the Sabbath will be something like a test in the future. People will, and so you have what's called the three angels' messages, which you may hear about, which again are saying that's a central teaching that the hour of God's judgment has come. Worship Him as the Creator who made heaven and earth. So all of this was developing in the 1800s, late 1800s, an understanding of this framework and it kind of fit together. You know, you start with an assumption, it worked together and made sense. And people said, yeah, I see that. Yeah, so my grandmother and my mother-in-law one left the Lutheran church to become an Adventist, the other one left the Anglican church to become an Adventist because of Sabbath. They've been keeping the wrong day. And why did they keep the wrong day? Because church authorities claim that right. And those church authorities are not biblical. So, you know, I listened the other evening to a very fascinating conversation by three Catholic gentlemen. It's a blog you can look at. And they were making the case that Sunday was the day that you should be worshiping. And they kept talking about Sunday as the Sabbath and so forth. And so it's interesting for me to hear that. And they were quite convinced. But Adventists say, you know, you don't get to pick the day. God already decided that. It's there, clear. Why did you change it? Who are you? Nobody has the right to change it but God. And Jesus didn't change it. In fact, He rested on the Sabbath day, if you didn't notice. Even He, when He was in the grave, was over Sabbath, He was resting. So who are you to change it? So other distinctive teachings, the notion of present truth, kind of a fundamental idea that, and we see that probably right now in the secular world. What day is this? Today, what are we honoring today?
Indigenous people.
I hear two different voices. One is present truth. Old truth said it was Columbus Day. Present truth said, no, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. So we became aware that for all of his virtues, Columbus and a number of other people assumed that all this was here for them to take just because they came with the king's authority, that somehow they could own it. And it didn't make any difference if other people thought they had it. It was theirs, and they would make them their, and you've read these documents. They did it with the blessing of the king, and they thought of God and so forth. So we're seeing a present truth that's kind of uncomfortable if you're Italian. You're old, you come from New England, you think, what's going on here? What was wrong with Columbus? Well, you know, I used to say to my students, what happened when he landed? It was either he discovered America or a group of Indians happened to salvage and sustenance a sailor who lost his way. He thought he was over in India, but they showed him a little hospitality. And then the whole question of anthropology. Kind of think about this for a minute. Are we one or are we parts? For example, Buddhism. You have the notion of the different elements. You don't have a soul in Buddhism, pure Buddhism. And then when death happens, it ceases to exist as a person. I know that's different if you're involved in Pure Land Buddhism. But anyway, the idea being that a person requires a body, and you don't have an disembodied soul, is core to Adventist belief. I think Jehovah's Witnesses do that too, others do, but it's a minority point of view. So you have a resurrection when Christ comes. People are not up in heaven having to say, you know, if your mother was watching you down here from heaven, wherever heaven is, and seeing how you were behaving and you weren't doing very well, that would be kind of hard on her, wouldn't it? And you can't pray to her, so So the idea Adventists make is we are in God's memory, God's heart, and He recreates us when He comes second time. And the text can make that quite clear from an Adventist point of view, although there are other texts I know. So there's no eternal torment. Growing movement within Christianity is to get away from everlasting hell, and rather everlasting results of annihilation. And that's a big point, that the idea that a God of love would keep people alive for what? For what purpose? Forever, to torment them. That's one of the selling points that Adventists make as they think about their evangelical Christians. How do you describe a God who keeps people alive forever in torment? It belies the point, so that's part of their argument. Also, healthy living. Early Adventists were a sickly bunch. They got involved in health in part because of Ellen G. White, who was one of the founders, prophetess. And they had these 8 natural remedies which have been taken over in creation health with some variation. So, like Mormons, or pardon me, Latter-day Saints, no alcohol, and it used to be no coffee. Used to be no coffee. Used to be. Vegetarians, and if you weren't a vegetarian, then you avoided the unclean foods, scavenger foods. You stay away from that. People ask me what I am. Am I a vegetarian? I said, well, I eat like Jesus. Once a year, there might be a bit of meat, and then you can have fish, but by and large, vegetarian. Question? Other Christians looking at Adventists, they think about them. Are they a cult? That was a big discussion in the 1960s and 70s. It might be better to say that Adventists are Christian with cultic members, people who have a kind of closed view on the rest of the world. For example, just recently, a friend of mine who operates in charge of at another university, a Center for the Study of Other Faiths, invited a Catholic priest to meet with 2 Adventists and have a discussion of common ground. Well, there were people who got that squashed. Too close. Then there's the question of the prophet Ellen White. She's my spiritual mother, I have to acknowledge that. Profoundly interesting person. Is she inspired? Oops, I did it. There we go. Let me stay here. I'll come back on that one again. But anyway, with her role, can you have a modern day prophet? Well, she's not even living now. And she wrote an awful lot. And as one of my teachers said, who was very prominent, he said, she wrote too much. He was a very conservative gentleman, by the way. And then the whole question of Lord's Day. I mean, is it really that important? So there are those who feel very strongly that we need to have good Sunday observance. And of course, Catholics are ones who feel that way, even though many Catholics try to get their worship in on Saturday. In New England, we used to say more Catholics go to church on Saturday than Adventists, because they all went to Mass so they could have Sunday free. Hope had some words to say about that. So that's one of the differences that's irritating. That has some impact. For example, a hospital. What is an Adventist hospital? Its gift shop is closed on Saturday. Is that right? Well, yeah. And then there's the perceived legalism and exclusivism, as though they're the only ones. And you have these jokes. People are in heaven, the Adventists are there, and other people are coming in, and somebody, the angel says, shh, the Adventists over here don't know anybody else is here. We don't want to disappoint them. But I've heard that from different denominations. So this idea of exclusivism and how you relate to others when you see yourself as a reform group, as many groups were in New England in that 1800 period. You think of Jehovah's Witnesses, you think of Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, all up in that area. Reform movements trying to leap past 2,000 years of state-controlled religion. I want to go back to something they perceive as more original. Some have been very concerned that if you believe that there's no hell, and there is, I mean, the purpose of speaking about hell now is so you wouldn't go there. So that's what you scare people enough, then you know. So you take that away and think, oh, well, I won't worry about that. So there are concerns there that there's been a loss in that approach. And then often profound disagreements, Daniel and Revelation. If you're familiar with the Left Behind literature, remember that? Hal Lindsey and others who wrote in the last 30, 40 years quite about the rapture. There's the word rapture. Bumper stickers, you know. Adventists would radically disagree with that interpretation of Daniel and Revelation, and they're contrary on the other way too. And then the so-called investigative judgment, which is supposed to be going on right now since 1844. The scriptural basis for that, it's plausible, but not very compelling for most people. And then what happens to people who don't get the gospel? Well, interestingly enough, Adventists do not believe that if you don't know about Jesus, you're going to go to hell. Wycliffe Bible Translators down here have a wonderful program. I was down there one time, picked up a book, and it was a wonderful book about a family that went to the particular island place in New Guinea. And near the end of the book, the chief got up and said, you know, why didn't your grandparents come here earlier and tell us so that our grandparents wouldn't be tortured now? And that particular point of view is pretty strong, depending on how you read the Gospel of John and so forth, that if you don't know Jesus as your personal Savior, there's nothing for you. Well, Adventists would come back and say, wait a minute, there's this thing called the Holy Spirit. If you believe that, what's the idea that when a missionary goes someplace, that was the first influence on a person's life? Not so. And they will quote certain passages. So in other words, Adventists have kind of like an opening, not quite to universalism, but clearly to say it's not all up to us. God's at work in every culture, every religion, every person's life. There's that openness there that's part of Adventism that runs up against the evangelical position. Issues within Adventism. Officially, Adventists do not believe that God dictated the Bible, verbal inspiration. They believe instead that persons were imbued with thoughts, and then they use their own expressions. My specialty is been in the Gospels, and I can tell you when I read something that comes from Luke that Jesus says, it sounds like Luke versions. Jesus has a Johannine sound in John, and he has a Markan sound in Mark, and a Matthean sound in Matthew. So verbal inspiration is challenging for anybody, for me. But then there's also the question of Ellen White herself. Her use of sources right now is a big discussion within the Adventist Church. And over the passage of time, some of the things that she predicted, books like Great Controversy that were written in the 1880s, they're describing a world that doesn't seem to exist that way now. They're describing a world in which every colonial European power, all parts of the world were owned by European powers. That's not the case now. So there's an ongoing conversation, and Adventists are always interested in what the Pope's up to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he went to New Guinea, where it's a minority, and he really got mobbed there. However, Adventists were there this year and baptized 300,000 new Adventists were baptized in 2 months in New Guinea. So it wasn't just the Pope. So, I mean, there are parts of the world that are open to a Christian faith in a prominent way. And then there's another question. What do we say? Do you see yourself as one to warn the world about what's about to happen? Or do you see the emphasis on offering a picture of God who loves you and cares for you? And those two can be related, but there's a different emphasis. And some Adventists prefer to speak largely about what's wrong with the rest of the world, and they need to make a change before it's too late. And others are wanting to say that they stand with many Christians in offering the gospel. So the denomination has an identity crisis. The degree to which it emphasizes its similarities with other denominations is the degree to which it ceases to have a reason to exist as a denomination. Does that make sense? In other words, this is something that Methodists and Lutherans and others are facing. And most of my students, it's very unlikely, not very common for them to say, I'm a Methodist or I'm a Presbyterian. They'll say, I'm a Christian, or I'm a non-denominational Christian, which I say to them means you're an evangelical Protestant, is what you are. But, and I have a lot of ex-Catholics in my class. Students say they're spiritual, but not religious. So we're living in a time when tags are under stress. And I mentioned the challenge there relating between Catholic and Protestant. I could tell you more, but I think that is a challenge when you try to identify yourself as distinctive and yet be part of something else. There's a philosophical tug there. Which do we emphasize? And I have to tell you that there are tensions between the educators and the church leaders. Church leaders tend to be more conservative. They have a blueprint. They know what's going to happen. The educators are thinking, now wait a minute, there's some evidence that goes a different way. You haven't talked about that. So we have that, and that's true. That's always the case. And so you have a worldwide general conference which voted that women could not be ordained as pastors. Now, as a New Testament scholar, if you make a woman a local church elder, you might as well ordain them, because in the New Testament there's not any difference. But that's a big thing, because remember that the General Conference is made up from all parts of the Adventist Church, and there are cultures that are far more patriarchal and conservative and traditional who aren't comfortable doing that, and they're making a huge concession, even allowing women to be pastors. So in my church, 2 days ago, a very prominent young woman was commissioned rather than ordained. They couldn't ordain her, so they got as far as they could. She's commissioned. This is a discussion. Sexual ethics. Adventists are very conservative officially in terms of gender, same-sex marriage, and those kinds of things. And at some points, I raise my hand. I'm a member of the loyal opposition. Sometimes you grow older and you see things and you understand them. But anyway, that's part of it. And then certainly, I give a lot of credit to conservatives who have spent time poking holes and bringing up issues that have to do with the idea that of long periods of time, but even more than that, the idea of the complexity. So they buy into, pretty much Adventists buy into the notion that creation is an act not growing automatically out of matter, but of an external being that puts consciousness and so forth. We have another trouble here. Traditionally, Adventists have found themselves at some odds with the idea of a God of wrath, the language. What does it mean when God is angry? And is God punishing, is Jesus dying on the cross so God punishes him? We could have a good discussion on that. But within Adventism, there's a well-developed conversation that wants to make it clear that where was God when Jesus died on the cross? He was right beside him. And that's, I mean, whatever you understand about the wrath of God, we could spend, there's a lot of conversation within Adventists about the nature of the atonement, why did Christ die, and so forth. And I think finishing up on this one, how does the cognitive minority survive? I was thinking about it philosophically. Most people in our world don't have a sense of sacred time. And then you have a round world with a Sabbath on it. We know there's a date line, there's a philosophical issue there. You step over here and you're in another day of the week, what happened to your Sabbath? So that's always been there. But the other loss of sacred time is a profound problem for many Christian denominations. And then we're also likely to, in some way, flirt with the Christian nationalist approach, where this is a Christian country. But I haven't said, and I should have, Adventists for well over 150 years have been adamant on the separation of church and state. Adamant on that separation. Partly because they were on the brunt end of it. They got thrown in jail for working on Sunday. very strong view about the separation of church and state. And so this challenge within the cognitive minority is, to what extent do we agree that the country is becoming secular and that we need to have more Christian values? But there's a strong strain in Adventism. And so internationally, they're known for promoting religious freedom as the freedom from being opposed by someone else's religion. Even being associated with groups that we would call humanist groups. Adventists and humanists have stood together on this one, that we cannot have the state dictating. Now, what constitutes religion? That's the issue in part. And then philosophically, Adventist church has functioned like an elevator. People coming in, for example, with little education, get in an Adventist school. My grandmother had 6 months of education. My father is the father of emergency medicine for the state of Arizona. One generation, jump all the way up like that with the educational system. But what happens, the child gets to the second or third generation, they're not going to Adventist schools, they're going to Harvard or Berkeley and MIT. They're sharp, and the kids don't come back. So, and you see this movement philosophically, economically move up to an upper class or a more educated class, and then they leave, they drop out. That's a challenge. Okay, there we go. And we have success. What does it mean that the Adventist denomination has the largest hospital system of any Protestant denomination? What does that mean? It means they're a behemoth. and this Adventist thing sponsors races on Sunday at Daytona Beach with sports cars. They have dance things. And so this is a challenge for us. When you have an organization, it's Adventist, but what does that mean? I point that out, that there is a challenge. And then this multicultural, this is a real interesting one. Very, very interesting. Adventists in different parts of the world celebrate Sabbath differently. Some places that play soccer on Saturday, some places they don't. I grew up saying you can get the water up to your ankles, but you can't go any deeper than that. You know? So we have a worldwide church. I used to say, it used to be Pope John Paul, and our president was John Paulson. I used to say, Pope John Paul and John Paulson went to bed every night hoping the Lord could hold things together until they woke up the next day. He could help. So it is a challenge. Success has its own challenges, because as you grow larger, there's more emphasis on external control and some of those things. And we see that in the hospital system. I would say this in closing, probably, should be closing here. I would say that the biggest challenge my institution faces is the loss of mission. They will survive financially. They're really good at surviving financially. But will they hold on to their mission? With the way that patients are treated, whether you can have prayer with a patient, all those kinds of things that make Advent health systems attractive to so many people. It depends. It depends. Oh, okay, that's mine. That sounds. You've got that paper. I taught religion. World religions were probably, I would guess, to about 7,000 college students I've taught world religions to. And what I always assigned them was a job. You have a certain religion, you go out and find somebody who practices another one. And here are the questions I want you to ask. I want you to find out how they practice their religion. Not just all the beliefs that you can go to Wikipedia and read. So I thought, I think that's probably fair. Say, what does it mean to be practicing as an Adventist? And this gives you an idea of some of the things that I do. And I'm looking at it and thinking, really? That's it? Okay, so one of the great passages in the book Great Controversy, written by Ellen White, which is, by the way, 8 million trees were cut down to print 1 billion copies in some 50 different languages of that one book, Great Controversy, which Adventists often feel is the book that people need to read. And I have quarrels with parts of it, I have to be honest. But there's a sentence at the end which kind of gives the idea. This is how the book ends. Sin and sinners are no more, the entire universe, what happened to it? That's another whole question. One pulse of harmony and gladness beats in the vast creation. From him who created all flow life and light and gladness. throughout the realms of illimitable space. Yeah. That would be the vision of the Adventist Church. That at that point, it's a new heaven and a new earth. By the way, Adventists believe it's if you read Revelation, heaven is on earth eventually. You just read the book. So that's there's a little bit about it. Some references potentially, all fairly current, I think, that you can get access to. They may even be here in the library. I don't know. Okay. Wow, what happened? So you didn't reach up and hold the hands on the clock for me. Questions? Thoughts? Yes, Dan.
Well, I've been scribbling lots
I've
of
been
great
watching
notes.
you. I've been so impressed.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff that I want to talk to you more about. But I'll just say one thing. You had a great line. God is at work in every person. That resonates with me because the Taoists are very much about nature. They think God is in nature. The Stoics have their logos. God is in everything. Can you talk about how Adventists practice that today? How they reach out to others? How they work with other groups?
Well, I think, again, looking at the hospital systems worldwide would be one of the primary ways. ADRA, very strong emphasis on, and I think this is not just Adventists. A Catholic gentleman wrote an interesting book that in America today, United States, the groups that are the most likely to be philanthropic are the conservative Christians. Statistically, the numbers for dollars are in that, and Adventists would be in that category too, I think. It depends on their mindset, whether they see themselves, does a relationship, well, for example, if I as an Adventist try to become your friend, why am I doing that? And if I decide, well, Dan's really not going to be an Adventist, so I'll go look someplace else. See, that would be using a relationship as a means to another end. And I think what ADRA does is to say, no, we don't do that. We help everybody, and we're encouraged to do that. So it is always a balance, and we call that disinterested benevolence. No strings attached. That's really hard in our world to find. No strings attached. I don't know, I'm probably treading on dangerous ground. There are names to various parts of this building. There were people who gave money, so their name is there. That's not quite disinterested benevolence. If I give you money, I get a vote. But if I give you something and ask for nothing in return, that's disinterested benevolence. And that's hard for us as human beings to do. But I think that's a challenge. I don't want to be used by someone. Maybe you ever be on the airplane and you're flying along, and the steward, I had to be careful, the flight attendant. The steward, the flight attendant would say, would you fill out this form for me? I'm competing for an award to be the best. I'm thinking, is that why you're being nice to me? So you can win the award? That's problematic when there's a hook that somehow expected a return payment. Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you return for a moment to, I think his name was William Miller in the
Yes,
1840s? And there was a particular date when he had expectations about what would happen. What were those expectations, and was there disappointment around it, or was
So
it
in
fulfilled?
1844, October 22, he and the other folk who were Millerites expected Christ to return that day. And the end of human history that day. They were waiting for that. It didn't happen. We're still here. And the question is, it's called the Great Disappointment because Christ did not return on October 22, 1844. And so some people said we were wrong. Some people said, well, we got the date wrong. And others said, well, maybe we didn't understand the event right. The latter group was for Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah. Is that a little clearer?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Well, you've been very patient, my goodness. So I think you can see that why would you bring into this group when there were so many Christian denominations, Seventh-day Adventists? Why would they ask it? Part of it is because we are a presence in Central Florida. And part of it is because we have some beliefs that collide with other people's beliefs, such as Sabbath. Traditionally, also, Adventists were non-combatants. We were a peace church. You know, when they started offering free education, if you went into the military and you came from an underprivileged environment, it was real easy to sign up and hope you didn't get sent someplace. So Adventists today, again, emphasize non-combatancy. And how do you balance that with your country? We won't see in an Adventist church lots of flags, although in the South you'll see more than you'll be other places. But that separation of church and state is philosophically important. And it's eroded in part because how does a small community living in a larger environment not help absorb some of the beliefs, the nationalistic beliefs of the larger group? It's very hard to not hear it. I mean, we all want to policemen in the military, we appreciate that, but interesting. When I was graduating from high school, I couldn't graduate as an Adventist from a high school I went to until I went to a camp, a military camp by the church, where I learned how to march as a non-combatant, so that if I got drafted in after the Second World War, Korean War, that I would have some advanced knowledge of military life and I could stand for my convictions as a non-combatant. That doesn't exist now. There's many directions to go in. A word about the university. My founder, David Greenlaw, he said, this is to be an Adventist university. What that means is, it's a Christian university welcome to persons of all faiths with an Adventist flavor. Kind of like that. So the libraries are closed on Saturday, but you can go online. They don't shut down the online stuff. They don't serve, they'll serve meat, but they won't serve pork in the cafeteria. And you know, those kinds of things. So there is some symbolic, all religion faculty are Seventh-day Adventists, but that is not true of other departments and other department chairs. But typically they're hired because of their religious faith, that they're a faith-based person. They're comfortable having prayer with students in class or in their office. And they don't necessarily have to be a given denomination in order to do that. I'm trying to think, one of our best professors in microbiology is a devout Hindu. She feels very comfortable there at the school because she believes in God. I'm going over now, I'm sorry. But I have to tell you, I've told my friends this. I said, here I've got 55 PTs and PAs, and I'm taking them through a course called Identity and Mission in Faith-Based Healthcare, and they're writing a paper about the relationship with God. And here's one written by a Muslim, here's one written by a Hindu, and here's one written by a Christian, and you figure out which one's which. And you can't do it. You can't do it. So this is part of the world I live in, when I realize that people from other faiths, I may disagree. I think I've got it a little straighter than they do, but their relationship with God may be stronger than mine. Yeah. So anyway, so you're looking at kind of an anomaly. As I say, a member of the loyal opposition. But thank you very much. Okay. This man will grade me later.
No. That was very informative. Thank you so much, Ernie, and I hope you found that very helpful, giving a good introduction to Seventh-day Adventism and even how that looks maybe locally. And so we're here next month as well, and we'll be featuring a different religion. I don't know if I've actually looked up exactly which one it is, but if you go to Winter Park Library, you'll be able to see which one we are featuring.
I think David was trying to find a representative from the Rastafarian community.
That's right. We did talk about that.
Okay.
He was looking for that.
Rasta.
I think he had someone, and then so he's working on that. But hopefully next month we'll have Rastafarian. If not, we'll still feature a different religion as well. So thank you for coming. If you didn't sign in, we have a sign-in sheet at the back. But
So I need to put some pictures of William Miller so you can see what this guy looked like.